Hi everyone, this is Trevor Jones from AstroBackyard.com, and in this video I'm going to answer the top 10 most common astrophotography questions that I get. This one I hear all the time and in the comments of my video. What is the best filter for this certain type of telescope or these certain type of objects? So light pollution filters and the new multi-bandpass narrowband filters, they really vary both in capabilities and in price. And the reality is the best filter for you heavily depends on your shooting conditions. So someone like me shooting in a Bortle Class 7, a harsher multi-bandpass narrowband filter is really nice to use because it just cuts through that light pollution and capture those important details of the nebulae that I like to shoot. But if you're into Milky Way photography and galaxies, a filter like that is no good. You want to either shoot unfiltered or a really broad spectrum filter, something like the Optolong L Pro or the many other options out there for a broad spectrum true color filter like that. So it really depends. Ones that come to mind for broad spectrum are, again, the Optolong L Pro, or no filter could be even better depending on your situation. And then the multi-bandpass filters for heavy light pollution, something like the Optolong L Extreme is handy, and then the Radian Triad Ultra I've had great success with from my Bortle Class 7 backyard. In terms of the type of filter, there's a few different kinds, but the 2-inch round mounted is the most useful if you are using a telescope. You can get a little filter drawer to slot it in there, or a lot of the times you can thread the filter into the imaging train somewhere, whether it's in the field flattener. So that's probably the most versatile format of filter. And then there's the clip-in style filters, but those are heavily dependent on the type of camera you have. So there's specific ones for Sony full frame cameras and Canon APS-C. So there's a whole bunch of different clip-in filters, which are nice because you can easily thread a camera lens onto your camera and still use a filter like that. So lots of options out there. The next one I get all the time is, this video was sponsored by Cuts Clothing. The team at Cuts reached out to an astrophotographer to represent their brand, and if you don't realize how ridiculously badass that is, well, Cuts designed their own material and it took them 4 years to develop. It's what makes these things the most comfortable shirts I've ever worn. They wash really well and they just feel amazing. I've been rocking the new Cuts summer collection in my videos. Wait, do I have style now? So if you want to support me and the only clothing brand that appreciates a sick shot of the Andromeda Galaxy, you can use the 15% off code in the description to get that off your next order. Thank you, Cuts, for sponsoring this video. The next one I get all the time is, what's the difference between a small refractor telescope? I think specifically people are talking about an apochromatic refractor telescope, say a triplet, over a camera lens, a high quality camera lens. So the big thing I want people to know is that there are some big differences, but in a lot of ways they're also very the same. If you're shooting with a prime telephoto lens, the focal lengths and the F ratio is going to be very similar to some of the refractors you're using. Say at the 400mm f6 range, very comparable in that way. The biggest difference between a camera lens and a refractor telescope is that those camera lenses were meant to focus a lot of times with autofocus, and the lens design is very complex. Whereas a refractor telescope, say a triplet, is a 3-element design that was designed to capture sharp images of space without any chromatic aberration. The lenses have similar qualities to them, but they also have a lot of extras that you'd be paying for in the lens that a refractor telescope doesn't have. So you can really think of the refractor, an APO, as the design that was meant for capturing objects in space and capturing those flat field images of sharp stars. That being said, if you already have a nice prime telephoto lens in 300mm or above, or something like the Rokinon 135 f2, you can do amazing things with those camera lenses. Where it gets tricky is stuff like with the filters that I talked about, the 2-inch filters, there'll be nowhere to thread those into when usually there is with a refractor telescope. The mounting hardware, the dovetail plate, the focuser, focusing is way different with a camera lens and a refractor telescope. They start to add up over time. It might look like on the surface, if you're just comparing aperture, focal length, and f ratio, that a camera lens and refractor are the same thing, or a lot of times it looks like the camera lens is the clear winner. But when you actually put it into practice in the field, you'll start to realize the difference that a refractor telescope makes, particularly in that focusing, having a fine focuser and being able to lock it in, as opposed to that really loose focusing ring on some of these lenses. So you really have to experience it to see the true difference of a telescope versus a camera lens. But like I said, a lot of those lenses do great work in terms of astrophotography, whether it's a wide angle nightscape shot or even deep space astrophotography. I've seen great examples of both. This is the overall most question I get asked, and it's which telescope should I upgrade to? And then overlapping into what's the next piece of gear I need. That is by far the biggest question, and I'll never feel comfortable saying, you should buy this. I like to give suggestions and show you what's possible with certain gear. I think that's better for you to make your own decision, but I'll never tell you exactly what you should get because it's really different for everyone. In particular though, if you're upgrading your telescope, here's the advice I have to give you. It depends on what you want. So if you feel like your current scope doesn't have enough reach, and a lot of people are in this position where they're shooting at 400 or 500 millimeters, and a lot of those targets, specifically the small galaxies, you just don't have a chance at capturing them in detail. They're so small. Over time, you may really want to get in there and look at them. If you do get a telescope with more reach, more focal length, there's so many different options to take. And unfortunately, if you're a refractor telescope fan like myself, to get that reach becomes very, very expensive. It's not practical to go for a refractor in the over 1,000 millimeter focal length range. It's just so expensive. So you might have to switch telescope types if you do want to get that reach. Something like a Ritchie-Chrétien, or some Newtonians can go farther, or something like an SCT, like the Edge 11 HD. If you saw me play with that last year, that had over 2,000 millimeters of focal length. But of course it was a new telescope type. It focuses differently, it's a different size, and there's so many other things to figure out. So what I would warn you if you're upgrading telescopes is just be aware of all the other changes you're gonna have to make when you do upgrade telescopes. You might even need to change your telescope mount if it's too heavy. Balancing's gonna be way different. Mounting hardware, are you gonna get a guide scope on there? Are you gonna do off-axis guiding? Are the filters gonna be able to deal with the speed of your telescope? So all those things come into play where I can never just recommend, this is the clear upgrade for you. But the great thing about astrophotography is it's a really long game hobby. So you'll know when it's time to upgrade your telescope, and you'll know exactly what you're looking for. Here's a good one. So should I modify my camera for astrophotography, or do I need to modify my camera for astrophotography? You certainly don't need to, but it will limit the types of projects you can shoot effectively. So if you like shooting emission nebula like I do, that's probably my favorite. Yeah, it's pretty well a must do to get that camera modified for astrophotography. So those that are asking that question are usually using a stock DSLR or mirrorless camera. And then to do that modification, if you're brave enough to do it yourself, you better be careful, because it involves removing the stock IR cut filter inside the camera that blocks those reds in the night sky that we want to pick up in those emission nebulae wavelengths of light. You can also order a pre-modified camera from a professional service. I know Spencer's Camera does that, or you can send it away for someone to modify it for you. And all of those things are pretty scary when it's a really nice camera and you're committing to modifying it for astrophotography, because then you can still use it for daytime use, but you might have to make some major adjustments. You may lose your focusing ability. And I would recommend that if you do modify your DSLR mirrorless camera, that is now just an astrophotography camera. You use it exclusively for that, because it's gonna go through hell outside anyway. You wanna just dedicate it for astrophotography. Dedicated astronomy cameras, on the other hand, are pre-modified. They have that sensor that's meant for astronomy. So that's another option to consider there if you're ready to take the leap into the learning curve of a dedicated astronomy camera. All those sensors are modified to pick up that H-alpha wavelength in the night sky. Here's another really common one: where to buy used camera and telescope gear. So again, I don't feel comfortable giving a specific classified site to you because, you know, in the used marketplace, anyone can have a bad experience if you don't do your research and you deal with a shady seller. With that being said, in the telescope world, generally from what I've seen, people are really honest and nice. They take care of their gear. They're not trying to ruin their reputation by selling someone being misleading about something. So used astronomy gear, I've had great success. I'll say that if you can do something locally where you can actually go and pick the object up and look at it before you buy it, that's best case scenario. I bought my Skywatcher HEQ 5 mount locally. It was about a 2-hour drive, but I was able to see it before spending $700 on my new telescope mount. But if that option's not available to you, there's the Cloudy Nights classifieds, there's the Astro Mart, and then there's Canada-wide astronomy buy and sell, Astro Buy Sell they call it here in Canada. And of course you can look on Facebook and Instagram. There's lots of deals going on there too. So maybe making a connection with a group of astronomers and getting to know them and asking, hey, is anyone selling a Newtonian reflector? I'd love to get one. That's probably better because then you have a real relationship with this person beforehand. So that's my advice there for buying used gear. Oh, this one's a killer. And it gets me. I still deal with this all the time. Every time I have a new telescope system, you have to figure out that backspacing. So all the backspacing means is that the right distance from that camera sensor to the first element of glass, usually the field flattener or corrector, has to be a specific length. For backspacing, all you have to do is actually look it up in the manual. Chances are your camera tells you exactly what the backspacing needs to be for your camera in this particular configuration. Sometimes you have a filter wheel in place. Sometimes you need to use those adapters. It could be 16 millimeters or 20 millimeters. But finding that backspacing is critical if you do want that flat field image, but it's something you need to dig into and find out. So I can't give you a universal answer for everyone for backspacing. My answer is to look it up. And if it's not available, ZWO is really good at the diagrams and showing different configurations and showing them what the backspacing needs to be for their cameras. If you can't figure it out, go on Cloudy Nights, go on an astronomy forum and just type in your specific camera and backspacing. Chances are you'll see picture examples of others, how they have it set up. I always thought that was so useful. I would just do a Google image search for my camera and the specific telescope, and sure enough, a lot of the times you would see a photo of someone with their setup and it's like, oh, okay, that's how you've got it there. That's the type of adapter you used. Because that's the fun part. If you don't have the adapters to get the right spacing, you'll need to order some parts, but there's lots of those available. So it's annoying because you want to get up and running with your camera right away, but getting that backspacing correct is critical. This is a big one too, and I really feel for folks in this position because just like that backspacing, you're ready to go and you're running into this issue and you just can't get started. Dealing with focus, it's something that I've got good news for you. Once you figure it out, you've got it, and that system, you'll never have to deal with it again. But getting up and running to start with, you'll need to find focus for your new camera. Some of the things to consider here, if you're using a DSLR camera or mirrorless and you're using those settings on the back of the camera screen, you want to use those exaggerated settings. Crank that ISO, use the lowest aperture possible. Let in as much light as you can to the camera if you're using live view to give yourself a chance at actually seeing some of the brighter stars in the night sky. So the bright stars and even man-made objects in the distance, a street lamp, those will all aid you in the focusing process, because I think people asking me this question, it's not that they just can't get super sharp focus, they just can't get focus at all. They see nothing in their camera. I remember dealing with this myself early on, and it can be very frustrating. You think, okay, did I leave a lens cap on? Is the camera broken? Is there something wrong with the telescope? Just keep in mind, as those F ratios get higher and higher, F7, F10, it's gonna be harder and harder to see a live image of even the bright stars because it's just dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. as opposed to something like the camera lens I'm shooting on here that's f1.4. That is so fast. When you have an aperture that's so wide open like that, you'll see lots of stars to focus on. But telescopes, of course, in the f6 and above, it will be harder. So you could be way out in your focus. So once you know you have your proper backspacing, to call back on the last answer, then roll that focuser in and out on a bright star. If you can't confirm a bright star in the field and you're just lost in space, use a man-made object like a street lamp in the distance, because chances are, even if you're way out of focus, shining at a street lamp with your telescope pointed at it, you'll see a faint glow there, and then you can just bring that into focus. Another thing here is that you might realize that you can't reach critical focus, and then it's a backspacing issue between the camera sensor and the focal plane of the telescope. You will figure it out eventually. Getting that backspacing correct is critical, and then use a man-made object if you have to. Focus on that, and then slew over to a bright star in the night sky and really refine it there. A batten-off mask, of course, is when you really get that precision focusing, creating that star pattern. What do I use to power my setup in the field? Now, this is one I get all the time, and unfortunately, I don't have a great single answer for you here. It's something to think about. I used to use those portable battery power packs like the jump starter kits, and they let me down. Having your telescope rig just shut off in the middle of an imaging session when you're somewhere dark, because usually if you're mobile and you have a battery powering your rig, you're somewhere dark and it's the last place that you want to stop imaging. So I'm at home, I'm always plugged into AC power with long extension cords across the yard, and it's just a sure thing. When I go portable, a lot of the times when I go to dark sky places, I'm using a star tracker that either has an internal rechargeable battery, or in the case of the Star Adventure, has 4 AA batteries, which is great because of course you can keep extras and swap those in if the battery's getting low. But as for running a really robust deep sky imaging rig with a laptop computer and all these other battery draining devices like dew heaters and all of that, I don't have a great battery option for you yet, although I am working with a company that's going to send me a prototype of something that they believe is going to be great for astrophotography, so I'll have a lot to share about that soon. But in the meantime, I know that Galactic Hunter they do all their imaging out in the desert, and so they're very mobile, and they've done so many episodes out there that I know they have a great solution. So I would check out Galactic Hunter's video about portable battery power in the field. I believe it's the Jackery that they use, and those look promising. I just haven't used one myself. So stay tuned on the portable battery pack situation. Here's one that's super relevant for me in my climate where I live. How do you protect your gear in the elements outside? I've got some great news for you here. It's not as nearly as much of an issue as you think it's going to be. Now, this is coming from someone who I've set my telescope gear up in all weather. My brand new Canon EOS RA camera, the nice telescopes in the snow, in the frost, in the heat. These items were all meant to be used outside. Astronomy happens outdoors, of course, and hopefully the product that you've bought was built to last and built to be outside night after night. So in Canada, we get it, it's very, very cold. And a lot of people think that your mount's just gonna shut down or that you shouldn't have your equipment outside. Unless it's below -10 degrees Celsius, in my experience, it's been a non-issue. My Skywatcher mounts track no problem in that kind of cold. The cameras operate properly. The only thing you have to deal with in that kind of weather is your lens is frosting up. So a dew heater is a must. Generally, I've had no issues in these extreme temperatures. Get over the idea that it's just not gonna be, that it's gonna be exposed to the elements and you're gonna ruin it. It's just not the case. This is outdoor equipment. Just to add on there, certain things weren't meant to be outside, like your computer. And your power cables. If you're using power cables that were meant for indoor use, you'll have to take some precaution there. You can use a little Rubbermaid bin to keep things in, say your power bar and stuff like that. It can kind of stay warm together and generate a little bit of heat. The same thing, a little hack for your computer. If it's not a rugged one meant to be outside, keep that power bar, the AC adapter, inside of a Rubbermaid bin, because that power adapter, you want to protect it, of course, but it also heats up slightly. Oftentimes I've found in the winter that's enough to keep the inside of a little plastic container warm enough so your computer still works. I have had a computer shut down from the cold before. You just start to see some weird lines on the display screen. So yeah, your computer's a bit different there, but there's lots of options for small containers that you can put stuff like that in, and you just have to be careful there. This is a good one. Software recommendations. Should I use X software? So the thing about that is it really comes down to personal taste and also your experience level too. So I hear a lot of people talking about new stuff that I don't use often, Affinity Photo, and I recently looked at the Skylum software. There's so many options now, more so than ever. There are a few common choices that a lot of people use. PixInsight seems to be the one staple software because it is just so fantastic at astrophotography processing. It also happens to be probably the most difficult to learn. I'm still learning it myself. Adobe Photoshop, of course, is a heavy hitter, and I would consider that to be a staple software for astrophotography image processing. But others just do a complete PixInsight process. They do their stacking and everything in PixInsight. So there's so many options to choose from. What I will say is that if you're going to really dive into one and learn its little quirks and how to use it, really stick with it, because even after a few years, you'll still be learning new tricks and techniques. There's so many great YouTube channels now where you can kind of get a taste of everything. Then the cost of the software is something you have to weigh in as well. I understand a lot of people don't want to spring for a subscription to certain softwares. Just committing to a subscription scares them, or you can pay a lot up front and own the software forever. So personally, the software that I still currently use is Deep Sky Stacker, which is free. I use Sequator for stacking as well. Adobe Photoshop for 85 to 90% of what I process. PixInsight is squeaked in at 10%, and it is oh so powerful, still learning it. But AstroPixel processor, I've explored that, it looks great. Affinity Photo and its specific astrophotography tools look really interesting. And then the Skylum Luminar AI, I use that for more of the non-astrophotography stuff. I use it actually for my YouTube thumbnails. So many options out there. So there's no one specific software that you should be using, because there's a few I didn't mention that I'm sure you all love. So all I can say about that is then when you do decide on one, really stick with it and give it time to fully explore it. That's the only way to go. And lastly, a question I get almost every day is, do I sell prints of my photos? I know a lot of other astrophotographers' bread and butter is to sell their work, and I admire their hustle and dedication to their craft. Honestly, my images come second to providing you guys quality information, because at the end of the day, me taking great photos really isn't that interesting to you. I'd rather you get your own shot, and that's where my heart's at. I hope my answers to the top 10 most common astrophotography questions I get have given you at least one tip to improve your skills. Until next time, clear skies.